Hi, I'm Oliver and this is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. So this is a sequel to a video I made way back 3 years ago when I hit 10,000 subscribers. In fact, it was about 3 years ago, a week ago, if that makes sense. So I thought it'd be a complete hack and do another one. All jokes aside, I thought it'd be a nice chance to talk about some of the artists and records that maybe I haven't had the opportunity to talk about in artist guides so far, in 5 albums videos, etc. So there's just a handful of records that I really love and I'd like to share with you guys. And we will be doing listening parties for these 2 records. As always, we're doing listening parties on Mondays and Thursdays now on the Deep Cuts Discord. All you got to do to join is click the link in the description. It takes you there, and if you're confused, the admins and moderators there will be able to help you and the other members of the community. But yeah, come and listen to some of these albums because I think some of the choices are pretty good fun. This is one of my favourite rock records of the 90s, a screwball, freaky, grot bag of a record. Mike Patton's Faith No More are just one of the oddest bands. They're very difficult to box into a specific genre, and for me, Angel Dust is by far the best thing that they ever did. I first found this record flicking through secondhand CDs at a record fair. I haven't been to a record fair in years, to be honest, but this was in this really battered jewel case. It was weathered from the sun, you know, sometimes when the colours run a little bit and everything fades a little bit. It was like a quid, and I thought, oh, why not? I'll take a listen. And I was so surprised at what I heard. Mike Patton said to Kerrang in '95, I thought it was a great record, but it was dense and probably too clever for its own good. We made it more difficult for everybody, even ourselves. I don't know how difficult it really does sound now with everything we've had since '92 and the experimentation that certain rock bands have done. You know, back in '92 it might have been a bit more difficult, but it certainly takes a while to adjust to what's going on here. You've got kind of crunchy riffs, you've got wailing vocals, horrorcore synths, and sometimes some quite genuinely uplifting piano work. From that meaty bass riff played off the synth in Land of Sunshine to Jim Martin's squawking guitar in Kindergarten, everything is held together by Mike Patton's balls to the wall vocal delivery. Very, very charismatic. And the hilarious Be Aggressive, of course. Now, the story that I've heard behind this is because the song, of course, is about male-to-male blowjobs, okay? And apparently it was written because there was this kind of machismo to some of the fans that would come along to gigs, you know, this alt metal band, or we think we're really hard and stuff. So Mike Patton and co thought it'd be really funny to write something about men giving each other blowjobs and hopefully get the crowds to sing along to it, not really knowing what it was about. I don't know how true that is, but read the lyrics, it's really funny. Also, this will be one of the albums we're going to listen to on the listening party. So yeah, I just love this record. I discovered this gem of a record only relatively recently, actually, and I'm going to plug it one more time because I love plugging it. Ted Giola's History of Jazz. The book is such a resource, and once again I found something that I've just absolutely fallen in love with that I'd never heard before. Obviously, I'd already heard the more famous Bill Evans records, so things like Moonbeams, Sunday at the Village Vanguard, his work with Stan Getz, of course Miles Davis. But this album was like a gut punch to me, and these days, I've got to be honest, something's got to be very special for me to sit up and take note halfway through a first listen, and this record absolutely did that. It's a side of Evans that a lot of people forget about or they haven't even been exposed to, but on this record he teamed up with Klaus Obermann and a Philharmonic Orchestra to deliver this flighty jazz classical hybrid that absolutely throws you for a loop at about the halfway point. The first movement, which is over 3 tracks on the release, it showcases that quiet fire that Miles always referred to when he talked about Bill Evans playing. He's expertly dancing across the other instrumentals and delivering this really nice atmosphere of modal fusion jazz. But the 4th track, where the second movement begins, is where things really blow my mind. So Bill has this incredibly lachrymose melody on the piano, and it makes me hang off of every note. Like from the first second the track starts, I'm just hanging off every single thing he plays until he very slowly starts to connect up with the orchestral players. The finale, with its brassy tuned percussion, never fails to blow me away with its majesty, and then we finally have this collapsing into the reprisal of the piano melody for the coda. Yeah, it's dragged me back time and time again, this release, you know, even though I've only been listening to it for 6 months or so. I absolutely love it. Go and check it out. I think a lot of you will have heard Phil Elverum's last couple of releases, especially A Crow Looked at Me, and you may have listened to The Microphones as well, which was Phil's previous project, but how many of you have delved into that middle period in the early noughties? If you haven't, you absolutely should. No Flashlight isn't going to be too much of a surprise if you've ever listened to any of Phil's work before, and I don't even know if technically it's his best record, but it's my favourite. It delivers everything I want from a record by Phil Elverum. It feels ghostly, it's romantic and fractured. It plays out like raging emotions, a fire of raging emotions in your head that you're unable to put out or control. I've regularly gone out for walks around where I live when the sun sets and used Phil's poetry as a bit of a cathartic outlet, and it really does chime so well if you're experiencing a moment of crisis or you just want to be contemplative and have a think. From the opening I Know No One, the gentle percussion frames that bare bones acoustic guitar. It's barely playing, which is again something you'll be used to if you've heard his style before, but nothing else would fit the way that he expresses himself and the way that his music comes out. The second track kicks off with crackling distortion and starts to overwhelm Phil's vocals as if he's kind of being sucked into his own overwrought emotion. The lo-fi drumming on the moan is a maelstrom of noise, and it's a good example of you don't always have to be technically expert in the production to communicate an idea, and in fact sometimes something that's far more raggedy and rough is the perfect conduit for your emotions and the way that you express yourself musically. It's such a good example of that. A real source of comfort to me, and if you've never listened to this record before, I hope it is to you too. From one source of comfort to the next, I have one of Australia's best kept post-rock secrets, although actually I really don't like that label when talking about Dirty Three. An Australian trio featuring the amazing Warren Ellis, Mick Turner and Jim White. Their music is more like delicate, soothing lullabies led by Warren Ellis's soaring violin sounds, and that's at least the best way of describing my favourite record by theirs, 1996's Horse Stories. Wholly detached from the distractions of concept or convention, you're just free to lay back in the lazy river that is this music, floating along and enjoying it until it reaches its inevitable conclusion. Like the warmth of sunshine, I can't describe how life-affirming I find the music that these guys create. The folky Americana of Sue's Last Ride, which drummer Jim White steps back on the beat so much that the whole track feels as if it's some kind of underhand hypnosis. Warren's violin line on Hope almost sounds like the forlorn wails of some lost child. Sixth track Red throws a real spanner into the works by creating this raggedy throwdown. It almost bottlenecks all of that sustained energy from the first 5 tracks and just lets it loose. And it's a supremely satisfying moment in it's just a fantastic record. I think I can hear the black metal purists running around the corner with pitchforks. Yes, Norwegian band Ulver's first record, Bergtatt, is considered black metal, but it's not as heavy as some black metal staples like Bathory or Immortal, and that's largely because Ulver were more interested in working around the fringes of black metal and actually introducing folk sounds in there, even electronic in most recent years. And actually, if you listen to their most recent single, it sounds like a bad Duran Duran B-side. Wouldn't recommend it. But the reason Bergtatt has such a soft place in my heart is because it was one of my first forays into black metal, introducing me to that frosty Nordic mix of rage and melancholy. Bergtatt, which is translated as Spellbound, a fairy tale in 5 chapters, just keeping some of that mythic quality to this kind of music. It gave me a taste of atmospheric black metal years before Death Heaven came up on the scene, which has now become one of the entry points for the scene, and I think that's only a good thing, whether you think that's true or not. The opening track, and no, I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to name these tracks because you always take the piss when I try. The first track has those requisite double kick drums, it has the grumbling guitars, but then it's all pinned down by Christopher Riggs' breathy and miserable vocals. The third track is an absolute highlight with Nordic harmonies and acoustic guitar disappearing into this black hole of blast beats and growling guitars. If you've never listened to black metal, consider this as quite a good entry point. I don't know how many of you will have come across Bogdan Raczynski, the Polish electronic artist who was signed once to Reflex Records, obviously owned by Grant Wilson Claridge and Richard D. James. He's remixed Björk's music, he's toured with Square Pusher, but I think sometimes he is forgotten about by people who listen to electronic music. He actually released a record last year called Rave Until You Cry, which didn't do much for me on a first listen, but actually since then I've gone back to it and I've really enjoyed it, and I implore you to go check it out if you're a fan of electronic music and you haven't heard this guy before. Now my pick today, 2001's My Love, I Love, isn't really like the things that he was making in the 90s, you know, some really enjoyable drill and bass breakbeats all over the place. No, this strange and beguiling record occupies its own space entirely, this bizarre amalgam of accordion, vocals, and quite pared back percussion. With the track names all being exactly the same as the title of the album, it's difficult maybe to pick out your favourite moments the first couple of times you listen to it, and it kind of forces you just to go along with this record, listen to it start to finish, and experience it as one complete entity. I think it sort of entices you to listen to the record again and again as well. You get sucked into the flat vocals of Bogdan himself, the synthetic flourishes and digitized rim taps. I only discovered this on an internet deep dive when I was 15 or 16. I'd already listened to the likes of Aphex Twin, the Ortec is the Boards of Canada, and I wanted to find something else that I guess would not maybe challenge me, but something that would open my eyes to what electronic music could sound like. And this record really was something different entirely, kind of carnal and goofy at the same time, and I don't know how that works. It's got an intimacy to it. The intimacy is reflected in that cover art of Bogdan just kind of laying there and staring into the camera, sort of out of focus, and that's the intimacy I think you get with this record. It's a bit silly, but it's quite romantic, and in that way it feels more real than many records out there that have, you know, a bursting heart. I think it's a really beautiful piece of work. A bona fide masterpiece, and looking back, maybe I should have included this on my Plunderphonics 5 albums video. For the people that enjoyed those records, sit up and take note of this. Beastie Boys' second record was, for me and many others, quite a big step up from debut License to Ill, certainly in its complexity and its scope, and so much of that is down to the way the trio used sampling. Those ever recognisable squawking trio voices go together with funk-flecked samples, really satisfying beats, you know, beats that just hit the nail on the head straight away. And all of that comes together to create, I think, one of the greatest hip-hop records we ever had. And I can't believe I've never spoken about it on this channel before. Just listen to the track Eggman as an example of how you really can combine humour with production dexterity. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. You know, I mean, this track has the line "Humpty Dumpty was a big fat egg," which always makes me laugh when I hear it. But then in the chorus section of this, you have this brilliant sample of the strings from Bernard Herrmann's Psycho score, and it just grooves so hard, and just that together, it's such a delight to listen to, even if you're just listening to all the different samples and seeing how these guys brought it all together. Jumping straight into that killer beat on High Plains Drifter, every single moment of this is really well thought out and not wasted. Not a single moment feels like it's wasted. Can't say that about too many records, can you? But it just means every part of this record is an unbridled joy from start to finish. And if all that doesn't entice you, the 12-minute b-boy bweebwas, oh god, you know what, I can never say it. I don't even know what that word is. I looked it up before doing this video, and I knew I was going to get it wrong, so I'm just going to roll with it, whatever. So it's like a sweep, the last final 12 minutes, and it drips with this funk swagger all the way through. Right in the middle of it, you have Adam Yauch rapping along to that killer riff from the Isley Brothers' Who's That Lady? I mean, what's not to like about that? If you listen to this and you don't love it, I mean, I don't know what to say to you. I actually didn't properly discover the genius of Welsh rock band Manic Street Preachers until about 2009 when they released Journal for Plague Lovers, a record I really do cherish, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I think the only things I really experienced of them up until that point were the singles like A Design for Life and If You Tolerate This, Your Children Will Be Next. And while they're good tracks, they're very radio friendly, aren't they? And it just made me think they were particularly tasteful Coldplay, which, looking back now and knowing what I know about this band, I'm kind of offended by my past self for thinking that. Also, 90s Coldplay is just Radiohead. Journal for Plague Lovers was a record lyrically written by Richie Edwards. They took all of his lyrics from a book that he'd been writing from. Usually it was Nicky Wire and Richie together who used to write the lyrics, up until Richie went missing in 1995, presumed dead, but nobody ever found his body. And James Dean Bradfield, Nicky Wire and Sean Moore decided to carry on the band without him from that day forward. I was struck by the tortured soul gasping to get out of these tracks, you know, lyrically quite painful, but also very funny, intelligent in places. Just felt like real poetry. Well, eventually I backtracked to Holy Bible at a time where Richie Edwards was still in the band and he hadn't disappeared, and he was writing lyricism along with Nicky Wire. Altogether a darker record, one which talks about nationalism, it talks about anorexia, the destruction of free speech, but the at times anthemic instrumentation really stops the lyricism from making this a bit of a quagmire of depression, and I think that's where the power of this record lies. Take second track, If White America Told the Truth for One Day Its World Would Fall Apart, which, by the way, on the track listing there's no spaces in that. I always get that title wrong, so I had to cut it up when I did the notes for this video. I mean, that song's basically about American consumerism, comparing that with Britain's imperialist past, but it's actually a rollicking rock song as well. That isn't the same for every track on the record, of course, and the 4 Stone 7 Pound track, which is about anorexia, which apparently it's the lowest weight you can get to before you basically die. And James Dean Bradfield's singing Richie Edwards and Nicky Wire's lyrics here, and they are hard to listen to. I want to be so skinny that I rot from view. I want to walk in the snow and not leave a footprint. Difficult stuff, but it proved to me that rock music was capable of dealing with quite weighty, difficult topics and still sounding brilliant. I cannot believe this record's been out for more than a decade. In fact, it's almost been out for 11 years, I think. It could even be more than 11 years. I'm getting so old. I remember buying it the day it came out and just being so blown away by its bludgeoning electronic euphoria. And it's something that the album sustains. It sustains this kind of elated feeling for the entire running time. A lot of people might have come across these artists by the way of Blank Mass, which is the moniker of Benjamin John Power. He's one half of Fuck Buttons. Fuck Buttons haven't done anything since Slow Focus, which was 2013, I think. It might have been 2015, can't remember that. Or they might have come across Andrew Hung, who has done quite a lot of soundtrack stuff recently. He did the score for The Greasy Strangler, a film I didn't know whether to laugh at or throw up at. But for what my opinion's worth, I think that Tarot Sport is the best thing these musicians ever did. I think it's a crowning achievement, and actually slightly better than Street Horsing, their debut, which I love almost as much as this. Every track from opening Surf Solar feels like it's intent on building to a peak that you feel might never come, because it just keeps on going. Booming 4 to the floor kicks are met with distorted chords, twisted vocal samples, but then there's this shimmering melody that starts to show through the cracks, and all of a sudden it starts to envelop the piece and become the most important thing. And it sounds like a cliche, but it's like a ray of sunlight coming through, and that is the power of the music that Fuck Buttons create. God, Fuck Buttons is such a stupid name for an artist, isn't it? It really is. The Lisbon Maru is a highlight for me, and interestingly, it sounds like they repurposed the chords they used in the opening from the debut record, Sweet Love for Planet Earth, but they turned it into this quite affecting, militaristic marching beat. And Olympians is a track that always stirs something inside me. I get misty-eyed every time that plonking synth makes its inevitable entrance into the track. And I have to shout out producer Andrew Weatherall, who produced this record along with the 2 guys from Fuck Buttons. Sadly, Andrew died earlier this year, but he left a sizable hole in the music industry and was such a talented musician and producer. You know, he was in no small way responsible for how big this record sounds. Like, this record sounds huge. Please go and take a listen to it. And actually, second listening party on Thursday is going to be Fuck Buttons. So come along and just get washed into the beauty of this album. It's so good. Little bit of a curveball for the final choice, eh? Look, Miguel just doesn't get enough praise in my book. I battled with myself for a couple of years thinking that Miguel was a guilty pleasure, but then I thought finally, no, fuck it, I hate that description anyway of guilty pleasures. He's a supremely talented guy who is capable of making songs that get stuck in my brain for days, and if that isn't something to celebrate, then I don't know what is. Wildheart is the California singer-songwriter's 3rd record, and it's a really gratifying blend of R&B and slick pop, which is delivered through very thoughtful instrumentation and Miguel's own charismatic vocal delivery. Whilst I liked second record Adorn, it did have a couple of howlers on it. Maybe the song Pussy Is Mine was a bit too far. Sentiment was a bit ick. Whereas Wildheart, start to finish, I think is great. It has that soaring chorus of opening track Beautiful Exit to the final track, which is Face the Sun, featuring Lenny Kravitz. Yeah, between that you have starry-eyed tracks like Coffee. Oh, I think Coffee is just, why is that song Why was that song not bigger when this record came out? I don't understand, because it should have been huge. It's a lovelorn, sensual track that I just find impossible not to like. Go on, I challenge you to listen to this record and not end up falling for its charm. I'm quite interested to get the perspective of you guys on this record actually, because I feel like it is the biggest curveball in this list, and I want to know what you think and how you compare it to other R&B pop records that came out in the 10s. But I love this record, you know, and I think I've been listening to it at least once or twice a month since it came out in 2015, and I think that is a mark of quality, certainly from my perspective. So yeah, I think it's brilliant, and I think it deserves a position among these other 9 records for things I just absolutely love. Like top to bottom, just smack my light stand. That's good, isn't it? And there you go, that's it. 10 more of my favourite albums. That's my hack video I put together. And no, I really enjoyed making it, and it's really nice to just be able to talk about 10 brilliant albums that I hope more of you will listen to. Come join us on the Deep Cuts Discord on Monday for Faith No More's Angel Dust. Come join us on Thursday for Tarot Sport by Fuck Buttons. Loving those listening parties, they're so much fun. They seem to be getting busier every single time as well, to the point where chat is almost impossible to read. But it's a lot of fun, so come and join us. Thanks for watching as always. I'll be back next week with who knows.